Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be painting a miniature with yellow, the mystery color, and I'm just going to give you some quick tips on how to paint yellow. You don't see a lot of yellow in miniature painting, mainly because I think it is a difficult color to use. It's notoriously transparent, much like its cousin colors orange and red, but unlike, say, red, for example, red you have the color next to it when you start going into your violet colors, which are much more opaque, easier to use, and then you can work into the red from there. Yellow, where do you start? If you want a bright yellow as opposed to like a yellow ochre, where you start is with Vallejo game color Scruffulous Brown. I decided to try this color because it obviously has some yellow in it. It has a hint of orange and also a little bit of brown. And that's our first tip. We want to start off with a decent undercoat, especially if you work with black primer like I do. So we begin with our Scruffulous Brown, and the key here is to thin it. When it comes to pour covering colors, a lot of people just glob on the paint in hopes that the paint straight out of the bottle will cover up the primer or the previous layer. But then you end up with chunks in the paint and starts looking very rough. You actually still want to thin the paint and then slowly build it up. Here I used probably 6 coats in total, thin coats, and slowly built them up until I had a nice solid coat of Scruffulous Brown. From there we can go on to our actual yellow color, and for this I'm using Gold Yellow, which still has a hint of orange in it. It's not a pure white yellow color. It looks very rich. And this color is more transparent than our Scruffulous Brown, but still we want to thin this. So again, very thin layers slowly building up the color. That's how we get smooth results. I'm leaving a little bit of the Scruffulous Brown in the deeper recesses, but virtually everything is being covered by our base coat here of the Gold Brown. Remember, when you go very high on your color spectrum towards white or towards black, you want to reduce the amount of contrast in your painting. So only need a tiny amount of shadow, at least for now. And here we are towards the end of the gold yellow phase. You can see how lovely smooth that is. There's no blotches of black primer showing through. Takes a little bit of time, but once you start getting into the action, it goes by fairly quick. This probably took 15 minutes or so to get to this point. And in case you're asking, well, why don't I just start with white primer, then I don't have to cover up all the black primer, it's because I'm just painting one figure here. That would make sense if I was painting a whole army of yellow, but when you're only painting one figure, and like me, you're used to using black primer, you want to stick with the same color primer that you always use and just learn to tweak the paint you're applying and know the tricks on how to apply it over that, in this case, black primer. For our highlights, it's going to be really simple here because the yellow is, so far at the end of our color spectrum, we are just going to add white 3 times. And again, colors are thinned. Vallejo white is actually, it covers better than the gold yellow, so that's a little trick we have to employ here, is to, as we add more white, we actually have to thin the highlights more to make them more transparent as we layer on our colors so we don't get brush strokes. And speaking of brush strokes, notice I'm using the horizontal miniature painting technique there. We are going across the miniature for the most part rather than just straight up and down. If we go up and down, we end up creating lines, and we'll get sort of staggered highlights as opposed to the rough edge if we go across or against the seam folds rather than with the seam folds. More white for our second highlight, just working on a smaller area, in this case moving further down the robes because they flare out a little bit more, and also just towards the top where the robes get pinched, underneath the belt area and also the hood. this is our third highlight, and you can really see the results of all of our hard work. And this is a darker color yellow, so I can get away with doing 3 highlights. Technically 4, because I forgot one. But if this was, again, a much brighter yellow, we would want to reduce the amount of highlights, and maybe we can add an extra shade layer instead, but it really depends on exactly what color yellow that you're using. And then finally we have our technically edging stage, but it's also another highlight. It's a 4th highlight. This one is just hitting the edges of the model, basically wherever I want a sharp edge to get that real nice sense of the pop to the color. And this color is usually just a little bit thicker, so it does give that kind of hard edge to it, as opposed to the softer edge we're trying to achieve when we thin our paints and slowly build them up. Last but not least, remember we really did not do any shading on this model. It was virtually all highlights. The screffulous brown was more of just an undercoat to get us to that gold yellow color. And that's partially because there's not a whole lot of deep folds in this model, so there's no reason to put a shade layer over everything when I can just do it now by making a thinned mix of screffulous brown and orange red paint. And just like we did with the layering, just kind of a very carefully placed layer here and there. You can see just a few little spots just to give us a little bit more contrast where we need it in those deep folds. And there we go. We have our construction worker, priest, cleric, whatever. So you can see the main key here is undercoat is very important if you're using black primer or starting from the shade layer like I do, and also thinning. Just because it's a transparent paint doesn't mean you should not thin it anyway. It just takes a little bit longer to build up that color so you get the nice smooth results. And by the way, this is probably the first yellow I've painted in ages. So even this was just an experiment on my part to see if I can get a decent looking kind of rich yellow color. And hey, it worked first time out. And it worked so well I've been using it more and more, because that's how you really learn, is practicing with colors you don't normally use, figuring out how do I paint red, how do I paint yellow, and that really builds up your skill set. So I hope this encourages you to paint difficult colors, and hope you enjoyed this, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Well, it's the end of the world as we know it, and actually I feel a little bit gassy, but otherwise I'm fine.